Okay. Damn, Joe. That was our first time with an intro video, and I love it. Thank you so much for putting that together. Yeah, that's a much nicer way to come into the morning, isn't it? You fired up? Yeah. And we got Kim in the studio as well with me. Joe is back. We have lots to talk about today, so welcome to Rabble Rants Live. It is Friday, January 31st. Already, we've almost made it to February. I hate the winter, so that's where that excitement comes in. What are we going to talk about today after the guests introduce themselves? We are going to talk about the tariff threats coming under Trump and what the liberals plan on doing about it. Maybe you all can tell me. We're also going to talk about Carney, his plan for the carbon tax. He seems to be the liberal front runner, and he's coming out with some ideas there. Alberta is bleeding family doctors, and Kim Seaver's here from the Alberta Workers, so he's going to help us dive into that. Can't not talk about the Ontario election that is happening right now. The writ has been dropped, the checks are bouncing, and there's other things to unpack around it. And so we will do so. Then we're going to have a little bit of an abolitionist ending to the headlines where we're going to talk about Trump's plans for Gitmo, what we feel about that. And also Kim has a headline coming out of his work on prison deaths here in Canada. So we like to shit on the U.S. for their prison industrial system there, but we've got some learning to do on our end. Then, as usual, we'll have disruptive updates, which are amazing. They are victories from around the globe, mostly Turtle Island, though, of activists getting shit done and getting movement on the things that we're fighting for. Usually they're really good updates, but they're always stemming from people disrupting things. And then we will sign off with a activist tip to help folks just be better equipped to disrupt capitalism. That's what we do. So let's start by saying good morning to Kim. Welcome, Kim. If this is your first time on Rabble Rants.
It is. Good morning, and thank you for the welcome. I am excited to be here.
You want to introduce yourself to folks that maybe haven't been paying attention?
Sure. My name is Kim Seaver. I am a labor journalist for an independent startup media outlet called the Alberta Worker, based out of Lethbridge, Alberta. We focus primarily on labor news centered in Alberta, and we also cover a little bit in politics as well. Been doing that for about 5 years.
You hear the drain in his voice when we say we have to cover politics. You know, I feel the same way, even though we do that here weekly. We mix it up, but yeah, I felt that pain there. Joe, you want to say good morning to everyone before we start? Oh, your mic's not working, brother.
Mic's not working because just not turning on them. Good morning, everybody. Yes. Thanks for joining us again. But yeah, thanks for joining us, Kip.
All right, and so you did hear me. Thank you for that video, though. That was Joe's work
did.
there. Yeah. Okay. Good. Because you didn't say anything.
Thank you for that. Oh yeah.
Now I know your mic wasn't on. All right. So we started last week by saying we don't often talk about U.S. politics. It's a Canadian content show. We've always had been, but there are things that are happening that impact us. And one of those is Trump's threat of tariffs. So for those who don't know, I think one of the most amusing things about this is watching those street interviews where Americans are unsure of how tariffs work. They believe that it not only is it going to save American jobs, but somehow it's going to make what they need cheaper. So for those who don't understand tariffs, like that is something that is put on by the purchasers of goods from the country that's experiencing the tariffs. We saw him use tariffs this week in a bit of a kerfuffle with Colombia. Trump is exporting. What an awful way to say that. Trump is deporting folks to Mexico and Colombia using military aircrafts. At one point, both Mexico and Colombia refused the aircrafts, and Trump responded with the threat of, I think, 25% tariffs on Colombian goods. And the Colombians then responded with a threat of 50% tariffs on U.S. goods. And within a few hours, we woke up to find out that they had come to their senses. to some degree, and all tariffs are off the table for now, and the flights have resumed into Colombia. So Trump is certainly using this as a weapon. When he talks about Canada, he seems to imply that the tariffs would be a punishment for a weak border. His demands are not clear. When or if the tariffs are actually going to be applied are not clear. So maybe that's why we don't have a very clear answer from our government as to what the response would be. But do you two want to chime in on, what you think the response should be to these threats of tariffs by Trump?
I think one of the biggest problems is exactly that, which is we don't know if he's going to be following through with them. We don't know if it's just something he's rattling, again, sort of like what he did with Colombia, where he just kept on threatening. But in the end, I don't know if other people behind him said, "It can't do that because it's just going to destroy everything, or it's just going to affect so much stuff," or if it's it's going to be something more where he's actually going to push to it. I think there's a lot. Like right now, he's going to be starting off with the tariffs, but aside from the mumblings of annexation that he's been doing, which is concerning, I don't think we have a clear picture of really what he wants from Canada. At least that's the feeling I'm getting. Kim?
Yeah, I honestly, I just think that Trump is completely incompetent and he has no idea what he's doing. I think he's just heard stuff from people and he's saying, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea," and then just goes with it and just doubles down on it. And even though he doesn't really know what he's doing, I think that's all the more dangerous, right? Because the fact that he has no idea what the consequences are going to be for these sorts of actions can be really dangerous, not for us, but for people living in the United States as well. And the very fact that they believe that our border is the problem, when it's highly unlikely that more people are illegally crossing the border into the United States from Canada than they are from the United States into Canada. Like we probably have more people coming from the United States, especially now that Trump's been elected, into Canada than the other way around. And the same goes for drugs. Like I find it highly suspect that we apparently are sending more drugs into the United States than the United States is sending into Canada. Like it makes absolutely no sense. If they want to clean up the border, then they should be cleaning up their own border first.
It appears like the Liberals are also placating them to a degree in terms of border security. I think it was just last week that we talked about the Blackhawk lease for the border, and we're like, what are they going to do? And it's like, it's just for appearance's sake. It appears that we can say that we're doing everything possible, and look, we're even leasing helicopters from you folks to do it, and it's a matter of an appeasement. And this is on the heels of endless Liberal changes to the visa program and who's allowed in and who's allowed to stay and get work afterwards. So, it's a bit of maybe placating to that, and obviously the right-wing narratives of xenophobia that are permeating everywhere. The Bank of Canada, though, they had a bit of a response. I mean, they lowered the interest rates from 3.25 to 3%. They did say that, the writing was on the wall. There was other things in play here for the Canadian economy that would have justified the cut in the interest rates. But they say it is a bit of a cautionary moment, and that they are doing it with anticipation of the damage that tariffs might have. Doug Ford is telling voters that 500,000 jobs could be lost in Ontario should those types of tariffs be enacted. But one of the things that I wanted to point out from the Bank of Canada statement that pissed me off was when they said that there was already the criteria there to lower the interest rates because our economy is doing so poorly. And they specifically cited slowing population growth and higher unemployment. Okay. But this is at the same time, we're kicking 1 million migrants out of the country. And we're talking about slowing population growth is damaging the Canadian economy. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. But the NDP are trying to, like, it's difficult for the, I think, federal parties right now to navigate this issue because the Liberals don't have a clear position. So the opposition, they're a bit floundering. Pierre Poilievre has not really, unless I, like, correct me if I'm wrong, he's not come out and said what he would do in response to tariffs. He's kind of humming and hawing, but the NDP says they're actually willing to work with the Liberals. And this caused a bit of a kerfuffle yesterday because the last time we checked in with Jagmeet Singh, like, he was determined to bring down the Liberals, said he would bring a no confidence vote to them. He was done with them, especially Justin. And then, rumors start that it's possible that there's room for a bit of reconciliation or cooperation. And in the face of tariffs, Jagmeet seems to be saying that's the case. Are we going to get an election, or are we going to have to wait until the proper date? You folks got any predictors on how this is going to unfold? Will this kind of crisis give the Liberals a second chance?
If so, it's just temporary. I was listening to an interview that somebody who was interviewing Jagmeet Singh yesterday, and he said that he wants the Liberals to bring everybody back to deal with this specifically, and then he'll vote against the motion of confidence in March after the leadership race. So if it comes back, it's just temporary. He's still intending. I mean, who knows how much credence you could put into Jagmeet Singh's promises, but he still says that he's intending on voting against the government in March after the leadership race is over.
I mean, it's hard not to fault in regards to, like, tariffs of the scale that Trump is promising is a crisis that does need to be addressed. We can't just ignore it or just wait till later on. Wanting to come back to the House to at least address that particular, especially if it's a single issue, I don't think that's really a terrible thing. Something needs to be done. But yeah, I think I'm with Kim on this one, which is yeah. He'll probably go with the tariffs. What he does after that, is he still going to bring down the government? Possibly. There's nothing that really sticks him, forces him to keep the government in power.
Yeah, it's kind of, we'll have to wait till we get there, as we always do, right? It's all just speculation. Yeah. But the idea that, like, a single piece of legislation could be passed to deal with Trump, right? To deal with Trump and his threat of tariffs is highly unlikely. It'd be prolonged if we are to get into some sort of trade war. So I'm thinking, how do you convince Canadians to switch horses in the middle of what could be a big crisis? But for, like, back to Kim's comments, though, it's like this could all be for naught, this entire conversation, because he does really just use these threat of tariffs to get other things. We just don't know what that other thing is. But, if it's talking about tighter border security, that's something Poilievre would give them. Even the Liberals would give it to them to avoid tariffs, for sure. They would be happy to be spending to increase kind of police state initiatives. So it's just, what else are they going to be asking for is the question. But Carney is at least pumping out ideas. It seems like it's just radio silence from everybody else in the Liberals right now. But Carney has a few ideas up his sleeve. He's really trying to win over voters already, like, even though we're not in an election. Joe, do you want to fill us in on his... And folks might be surprised to hear his plans for the carbon tax, considering when we had Ashley on, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, she had all the dirt on Carney, and he was like one of the godfathers of this carbon tax and finding a way to... She called it basically like a Ponzi scheme. She described the way that carbon tax... She was. Rightfully so. She was worked up. But take it away, yeah. Joe. What's Carney doing?
Yes. Carney's plan, and he's announced it now, that if he gets the leadership and he gets and he has the ability, he gets a mandate, he plans on scrapping the carbon tax and replacing it with a green incentive program. So the details are a little bit still.
So the carbon tax wasn't a green incentive program?
No. And reading from the article I was able to glean is the carbon tax is kind of a punitive thing. One of the reasons he's putting in there, and I don't disagree with this one, is that carbon tax has got it's got baggage now. Everybody's kind of weaponized it, and it's got a whole bunch of other things on it. So he wants to move away from it. All right. rebranding. That's not a terrible thing, considering people are making slogans about the tax. So, but this is where I got a little bit sort of like, and that's when removing the carbon tax, they want to put in an incentive program so that you're just incentivized to go greener. And I'm looking at like, well, that means there's no. If I'm incentivized, I'm not really motivated. And this is a plan that a lot of conservatives were putting in. It's like, let's just throw in some money in regards to some green programs. Let people come into it. If they're buying some green stuff, we'll give them a little bit of rebate. And again, the rebates aren't bad. There's somebody who's taking in a rebate for an EV car, but it's doesn't really add pressure to, as Ashley was mentioning, it doesn't really give much pressure in regards to get people to stop producing fossil fuels. It just gives them a bit of an incentive. And if we have specific goals we need to meet for Paris Accord, I don't think we're going to be able to do that at a reasonable rate with just incentive programs alone.
No, I don't even know if Carney would suggest that like this is, and I don't think he would ever suggest even the carbon tax itself was kind of a solution. It was just like one of the tools. But I think it's, again, more optics than anything, which is like part and parcel with how liberals deliver most policies. Kim, from Alberta, how does axe the tax ring around in Alberta? Do you agree with Joe? It's kind of just been weaponized and it's kind of like political dynamite. Liberals, can they keep it?
Yeah, as you can probably guess, it's pretty popular in Alberta. Alberta, as a whole, is fairly conservative, and so we have a tendency to vote most of our MPs from the Conservative Party. So a lot of people are understandably supportive of Poilievre and his campaign slogans. Not very popular with carbon. They're not very keen on the carbon tax, especially since it came from a Trudeau. They have this hatred for anybody with the last name of Trudeau, and are worried that there's too much federal interference with what's happening in Alberta. They want to have autonomy, or at least more autonomy than they feel that they have now. And so, yeah, they're pretty excited about the possibility that it'll be gone.
That would really take the wind out of the sails of the Conservatives as well if the Liberals get rid of it, even possibly before they go to an election.
Well, not necessarily, because Poilievre now is framing it as Carney will get rid of it, and then a couple months later he'll bring it back even bigger than ever. So he's still finding a way to reframe it to that Carney isn't the one you want long term. So he's just wanting to get rid of the carbon tax until the election's over, and then if they're elected, they'll bring it back bigger and bigger, better than ever.
Well, I guess, yeah, I can also sit on the lack of details around these green initiatives, because sure. Folks, to me, like, what's the difference? Until you tell me what the difference is, it's not going to really stand out as a solution. So, yeah. It's interesting how this Liberal leadership race is shaping up, but
I mean, it's not that surprising. Mark Carney's like any other centrist politician in that he's being opportunistic, right? He's trying to find things that are popular with people and then campaigning that way. But the problem is that the things that are always popular with people they always seem to be on the right, and they always seem to favor conservative policies and politics. And so as a result, we keep moving policies towards the right, which in the long term hurts people.
Yeah, I think in the last few months in particular, watching the Liberals drift to the right was not alarming, because I think we've been sounding that alarm for some time, and we've even pointed to the NDP drifting. But to see the Liberals have such xenophobic policies come in and now like talking about axing their own tax really is a detriment to the Overton window in Canada on a total, because you don't have those other ideas that could be just as popular, except they're just never really talked about.
Sure.
The watered down version is always what's presented to people, and that just doesn't stir it up the same way, like lower education with free education, or free transit versus no more tolls on a highway. Like, it's just like, if we had just presented people with just radical ideas, the problems around that word we've talked about, but to them it would be radical to hear a politician suggest some things, and I really could fire people up. And when we get to the Ontario election, I think my disdain for the lack of powerful ideas like that is just so clear, because you're at a time where folks are just so desperate for like this beacon, right? Like this clear alternative, like floundering, like what do we do in the face of Trump or growing right-wing populism? And there's just nobody filling in that void for them. So it's these elections are going to be a fucking disaster. But
this is how Hitler came to power, right? Nobody was fulfilling the material needs of the working class. And so he came in and started saying stuff that's made sense to people just at a superficial level. Yeah, sure. All these people are coming in and stealing our jobs and making things hard for us. Yeah, things are hard for us. We can't get a job, so somebody must be at fault for it. And so they started believing it, rather than people coming in and providing real solutions. And the same thing's happening in the United States, and of course in Canada as well. Like, people are starting to fall for this xenophobic crap, and because nobody else is presenting any real solutions,
or like really pushing back up against those narratives, right?
Sure,
like,
yeah, absolutely.
Like railing against them and feeling that obligation to undo the narratives, rather than kind of sidling up next to them, right? Like to just like blame immigrants for housing and stuff like that was just such an easy out for folks. And the NDP never really pushed back on that. Like you had groups like the migrant right groups and all kinds of grassroots screaming, going no, like for years, that the scapegoating is ramping up. But when it comes to like these platforms here, where mostly these ideas are coming from, or you can go to the US where the Democrats, like, they never really pushed back and said like, no, migrants feed America, that it's like an acknowledgement. Oh yeah, there's an issue. And even progressives here, you have to admit that immigration has to be a kind of a problem. Look at all the housing numbers, and like they're given tidbits, right? They're just given little morsels rather than taking it away, like taking all that oxygen out. And that's just maddening.
And nobody talks about how social housing in Canada has been drastically cut since the 1990s, under the previous Liberal regime, and then under Harper, and then again hasn't recovered under Trudeau. And that has a huge impact on housing costs. If we had kept up with building the social housing that we were, prior to then, we wouldn't have the same sort of housing issues that we have now.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, no, folks think that like developers will just adjust demand, or adjust the supply for us now that the migrants are gone. Like, yeah, that's going to happen.
Developers want to make money, and that's what they're going to do. And the only way they can make money is to charge more.
Yeah. I highlighted that Oh, sorry, Joe, go.
Yeah, it's exactly what one of his simple messages, because again, as we're all saying here, simple messaging is what's kind of going towards the mass group, where it's build the homes because everybody's suffering by house. It's a great message. Build homes. Everybody can't find homes. You don't need to explain how you can do it, because nobody cares about that part. You're just going to do it. Even though they're just going to be building homes, they're not going to be building social homes. They're not going to be building affordable homes. They're just going to be building more houses that are turning into investment properties, just exacerbating the problem. And again, people are being fooled, and they're going to be exploited.
I highlighted Sarah's comment there.
Nice.
Fear is pushing more people to the right. And I totally agree with Sarah. Not just like the fear of like what's coming, but the fear of, that they're a paycheck away from losing where they live. That, the fear of their material circumstances, that it's also being created, and we see that happening on purpose with neoliberal policies. This is me trying to transition into Kim's piece that he dropped, I think, last week on Alberta, just like bleeding family doctors. And before he gets into what he found there, it's a pattern people probably see across the country. Like, they may not be able to quantify it in the way that Kim has, but like they felt the substandard level of care that they're getting in healthcare or education. And it's like by design to bleed these systems to the point where you look at them and they are not even helping you anymore. They almost become a detriment. And so then the door opens for privatization, or just, nobody uses it, so we don't even need to fund it anymore. Just figure it out through the market. And, that's by design, right? To have you so fed up with the healthcare system, you're looking elsewhere. Kim, what is happening in Alberta?
Yeah, so 4 times a year, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta publishes their Physicians Resources in Alberta report. And just a week or two ago, they published their fourth quarter of 2024 report. And what they said was that there are 12,212 registered physicians in Alberta. This at the end of 2024. And that was a net increase of 86 over the previous quarter and 474 over the same period in 2023. Now, something to keep in mind is registered physicians. Two things to keep in mind. Registered physicians include all medical doctors, not just family doctors. So oncologists, anesthesiologists, whatever. It's all registered physicians. Anybody who's registered for the College of Physician Surgeons. That's number one. Number two is you can register as a physician without practicing as a physician. So you can live, for example, in Nova Scotia and register as a doctor in Alberta, but not actually practice in Alberta. So that's something to keep in mind. So this doesn't necessarily say that there are 12,212 doctors in Alberta, let alone family doctors. Now, 12,212 registered physicians is the largest number of registered physicians Alberta has seen since at least 2016. That's the latest I've been able to go back in accessing this data. However, one of the things that wasn't, and this is something that the UCP government, which is the current party in power in Alberta, this is one of the things they highlighted, the fact that we have the highest number of doctors in history in Alberta right now. But what they didn't highlight is the fact that we lost 249 registrations for physicians practicing in family medicine during that same period. Now, to be fair, we did gain over 500, I think 534 maybe in the third quarter. And so we're still at a pretty high level, but we lost almost half of the ones that we gained in the third quarter. But this is a significant drop. This is the largest quarter over quarter drop that Alberta has seen going back to at least 2016. And again, not these family doctors weren't necessarily practicing, but it's probably a good chance, since there are basically 250 of them, that a lot of them probably were. So this is really concerning. Back in 2020, I was keeping track of doctors closing down their practices because they were moving, they were retiring early, or whatever it happens to be. And I saw a lot of doctors who were leaving it. So it seems like that hasn't changed. The number of announcements I had been seeing back in 2020 seemed to have started to taper off. But the fact that we lost 250 registered physicians in between October, November, December last year is concerning.
Any indication as to like what is causing the levels? Is there a change in billing practice that sometimes drives them away?
Well, they are in the middle of negotiating a new contract with the province. And just like back in 2020 or 2021, when they did it the last time, the government's just been so adversarial. And so I can't say for sure why these 249 physicians removed their registration. And we don't know why. We do know why. We can know why all the physicians overall have removed their registrations, whether they moved out of province, whether they retired or whatever, but they don't go granularly for by specialty. So we don't know why these family physicians specifically have left. We just know that we lost 249 of those registrations. But it wouldn't surprise me if some of them are because of the way that the province has been treating doctors. I have seen anecdotally some evidence that supports that, but I can't say specifically for these 249 registrations that was the case.
I love how you talked about the numbers. We've seen that in Ontario, where the best example I can think of is when Ford took office. One of the things he did was, I don't want to get this wrong, he put a part, something that had been under the social services budget, he put it under education. Right? It is loosely related to education, but had never previously been part of the education budget. So then he was able to say, this is the biggest education budget we've ever had. And the teachers are left going with an asterisk. Actually, this really complicated answer, and it's not true, but like people don't have enough resources to unpack those numbers and to see what they actually mean. Materially, because often they don't jive, right? Like you're going, oh, you've spent more in education, but look at the schools, or, you're telling us we have more doctors, but I can't find a family physician. And then, it requires the work of folks like you to kind of explain it to folks and unpack it. And because on the campaign trail, or, when they put these ads together, there's no asterisks. There's not even any small print, going, well, technically, although we have more doctors, like they're all orthopedic surgeons, and you can't get to see one unless first you can go to your family doctor and get a referral. So all those specialists are for naught if you can't get to them. But yeah, I keep talking about Ontario and Ontario elections, and that's because we are there. Man, I guess like all the audience might not be from Ontario who ends up listening to this, but a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, I think you just reminisce from your provinces here, but there's a few things that are pretty unique to us and Ford follies. He's a bit of a Trump, where I believe he throws like thought balloons out and he does these things and they often backfire on him. And so that just gives us fodder for our show. So we'll start off by talking about one of Ford's follies. And then, unfortunately, we have to talk about an NDP folly, because I'm all fired up about that. But Ford called an early election. For folks who have not been paying attention, we shouldn't be in an election period. It should be about a year and a half from now, but we are in an election. And just so happens that right as the writ is dropped, we are all getting $200 checks from the premier. Like, the timing is just perfect. Right? He must have known that we'd be in a crisis for him to deal with at this point. But so we're getting $200 checks. But Joe, did you get yours?
I didn't get mine. And so there seems to be two things going on. And so the first one being, I'm getting reports. I was hearing from people yesterday. I even checked on myself. And I think, Jessa, you also mentioned the same thing too. The checks are supposed to be shipped out and sent to us, but a lot of people haven't been receiving them. They've had to call the ministry to get the checks sent out to them. Even though you paid your taxes, they have your updated information, but they're coming back saying, well, we need your updated address. Well, I'm not too sure why my address would be out of date from a year. That's a different thing. So a lot of people, if you haven't received the check yet, because you're supposed to, and it's a printed check, he was quite intentional. He wants that because he wants you to see it, not just appear in your bank account. Make sure to go check it. If you haven't received it, you're going to need to call. And there might be a little running around where some people I know, they've called, they've got their information in there, and then they go back to go find out, and they still haven't got the information. I went last night, and I even checked again today, and to go find out the status. And if you go to the Ontario page, you will get to the site to be able to go and find out the status of the message. Unfortunately, where is it here? When I went to go try it out, I ended up getting this message. Request is blocked. And okay. A lot of people have been reporting this is what they've been getting. So Ford is getting it done. But wait, there's more.
Yeah, no, I was like, get to the best part.
So if you do happen to get your check delivered to you, it you might still not get it because there's now reports that the checks are bouncing.
They say it's not from a lack of funds, that it's some sort of technical error, and we can blame RBC because fuck the banks. We love to blame them anyway, but it's just funny. Like
it's an absolute disaster, and I want to make sure this story sort of continues to exist during the entire writ, because this is kind of the point of it's a great summation of Ford, of how he's been this entire time. Between, again, I like Jess and I were kind of trying to look into the wonderful things that Ford has done for the province of Ontario, whether it be the
don't you steal my favorite.
Sorry.
Don't steal my favorite there.
Yeah. We got the green space scandal. We've got Jessa.
Well, the buck of beer, but the license plates. People can't forget those license plates, and people are like, oh, snore, what about license plates? This man worked for a printing company. He ran a printing company, and they ordered new license plates for the province, and we had those peely ones at first, right? That they just fall apart. I think we can blame the Liberals for those. But then Ford went out and changed the coloring so that it looked like the PC coloring, right? It was like their blue and white rather than the white and blue. And cops are like, yo, we can't read them at night. we can't see those things at night at all. They're garbage. You have to get rid of them. And so whatever the cost, they had to get rid of them. But buck of beer, he promised us all buck of beer, and then only one brewery ever signed up for it, and it was like a month of $1 beer, and I don't even think anybody liked that brand of beer. Just some bootlickers who were in with Ford, I guess. I'm not sure. But
a lot of the companies were coming out and expressing their just like saying like beer is just, you can't do that in regards to buck of beer. The ingredients, the workload, it's not, as nice as it would be, buck of beer is going to taste like buck of beer. It's just the nature.
Like black ice. I'm assuming it's like a little bit like Schlitz or black ice. I don't even drink beer, so I'm just talking shit. But back to those checks. I used to work at the beer store, and once you work at the beer store, I'm not sure how you drink beer after that, because you have to deal with all the empties. But anyway, those checks. $3 billion just for the checks, like the actual because even my kids are apparently going to get a check. Like everybody, millionaires, children, everybody's getting the $200 check. And it'll cost $3 billion when the province does it. Well, we have it, but we don't. And he says, and a small administrative cost. Well, I don't think that's going to be so small anymore, right? You've got bounce checks. You have like people going back and forth with RBC. You've got a website that needs updating because it's overloaded with people trying to get their checks. So now the cost of this, he says like, well, I can't tell you what the cost until it's finished. Yeah, I bet. I'd like to know what the political cost is going to be, because this was one of his, shiny toys, right? Like those he doesn't have a whole lot of promises to roll out. He announced something like he's going to make it easier for us to find a family doctor, but it was like pittance, like it's going to do nothing. So this was supposed to sweeten the pot for him going into this election, and I'm not sure what he's got.
How is $200 going to sweeten the pot? Like, that's nothing. In 2006, Ralph Klein gave money to everybody, and it was $400 a person. That's almost 600. That's almost $600 in today's dollars. Like $200 is nothing.
Cheap now. I've been cheapened. We're Ontarians are only worth $200. I guess our coffers. He's wasted a lot of money, Kim. I'm not sure he has any more to give. He rolled out beer and liquor to all of our corner stores, which lessened our revenue but cost a lot of money to do. Anyway, there's like this whole list. I think the OFL is doing a good job of like tallying up the wasteful spending that these fiscal conservatives do, which is like par for the course. Like Doug is not abnormal when it comes to conservatives and their spending. It's like where they spend it. But just a couple other notable things on the Ontario election that folks want to pay attention to. He took there'd been a trend to like get more advanced polls over the years, like more days, more locations. And he's like, nope, I don't want that. It's in the middle of January. We're already going to have, February. We're already going to have really low voter turnout because it's effing cold. And that's just the trend. But he has taken away most of the advanced polling days. We're only going to get 3. I don't know what the dates are for folks. I probably should have checked that before I came on here. But yeah, he's getting rid of the advanced polling, pretty much. So, plus the election's going to cost over $180 million. Joe, I was asking him the number before we came on, and he's like, that's what campaigns cost. That's what elections cost. They cost what they cost.
Yeah.
But it's like a year and a half early, right? In a province that's claiming it doesn't have a lot in its coffers to spend on the things that we need. So it's, he's going in, I think, a little bit short-sighted, but the Ontario NDP is just wanting to make his job that much easier, I suppose. I am having flashbacks. So, buckle up, folks. This is one that's got me really upset. Okay, I know we're going to talk about Gitmo and migrants and all these things that I really should get upset about, but it gets so personal. Also, because in 2022, I was screaming from the rooftops. We have so many episodes. I should be ready to link them. I'm not, but we have an Inside the NDP series, and my third episode ever on Blueprints of Disruption was called Candidate Crisis. And it was a detailed explanation of how the Ontario NDP went into local riding contests for candidates, right? Every riding association has, well, not everyone, has a group of people, and they all decide who they want to represent them. And sometimes you get a little race going on. Most of the time you don't. But they were going in, they were manipulating races, they were canceling races so that it was just an appointment of the person they wanted there. They were really screwing people around to the point where many riding associations just walked away. They had rallied around a candidate like a Sarah Jama. They had voted for them, and the Ontario NDP was like, no, we're rejecting them as a candidate. Here's who you're having instead. They don't even live here. And they are doing the same thing again this year, but in spectacular fashion. When they did it 4 or 3 years ago, nobody knew who these candidates were, right? They came after me at the same time period. It was, just local folks. They were really important to local campaigns and local riding associations, so it had huge blowback there on the volunteer level. But it didn't get the traction it should have in the news. So most of the province hasn't seen this before, but this is Sarah Jama. And so for people who haven't been paying attention, back in 2023, in October 2023, so a week into the renewed genocide in Gaza, and they kicked her out of the caucus. I'm not even going to... There's all kinds of bullshit as to why she was kicked out of the caucus. Her language. Merritt says she created an unsafe workspace. It's all bullshit. They couldn't control Sarah, so they had to get rid of her. And that's why they do that to candidates. They only want candidates they know they can control. Sometimes they can't. They were not going to deny Sarah Jama her first candidacy because she was so damn popular in Hamilton Centre, in all of Hamilton. People were coming from all over the province to work on her campaign, just even her nomination campaign. And I remember tweeting out going don't you dare block this woman's candidacy. It will explode. Your base will just explode if you try to block this woman's candidacy. And so they let her in, but the second they couldn't keep her quiet, she was ostracized. And they let her get kicked out of the legislature for wearing a keffiyeh. Not one of them came back the next day with a keffiyeh to challenge the rule or anything. They just cowards. And they lost people in droves. So Sarah, surprisingly, she was willing to give them another chance. I don't know why. I don't know why she would ever want back in that environment. Why anybody would, but that's a longer story. She puts in an application like one does. You have to ask. You have to go basically begging to Ontario NDP headquarters and ask one person, the provincial director. Just one person in that party gets to decide whether you can be a candidate or not. They also get to decide who can be for leader or not. So it was the provincial director that made all the choices that put Merritt Stiles where she was. Anointed, right? She didn't even have to run a race because she knocked out everybody else in the race for her. And Sarah asked to be a candidate for NDP in Hamilton Centre. Now, the Hamilton Centre Riding Association for 2 years has been pushing internally to get her back in. And they say no. And they say no even after the provincial council, which is an elected council, the president, vice president, treasurer, all those folks, they get together and they vote unanimously to let Sarah run as a candidate. Why that was even a council issue, it shouldn't be a council issue anyway. And the provincial director knows this. So they said, I see you vote. I don't care. This isn't a democracy here. we are not running her as a candidate. And the blowback again has just been enormous. So Hamilton Center, they're parachuting someone in from Guelph. I have a message for her. Don't run. They can choose to run someone against Sarah. Who the fuck are you stepping in over Sarah at this point? And the community and the riding association, the people who should have a say in there, and deciding that you're going to be the candidate. Find an opportunity elsewhere. Like that, there's no scruples there at all. None. Gloves are off for that one. Unexplainable to me how that person, I'm not going to name them, but run 3 times and lost, and you need to run a 4th time in Hamilton Center right now. Opportunistic people end up candidates for the NDP. It's a huge red flag for me at this point. If you get approved, this is like the litmus test. Now, anybody approved for candidacy by the Ontario NDP, to me, I cannot trust you. I cannot trust you. You've passed their litmus test, which means what good are you to the community at this point, honestly? But anyway, so on the day we find out that they've done this, and we could be all mad about it, we'll talk about it. I'll eventually let these 2 folks speak. But Merritt announces that we're going to get rid of tolls on the 407. So like all of Twitter, all of social media, all of their base are going, did you just see what they did to Sarah? I mean, people on Facebook that never post shit about the NDP because they're NDPers and they have the signs in their lawn, and like, we just don't do that. And we don't do that at election time, right? We don't talk shit about our party at election time, because then you're just cheering for Ford. But even Matthew Green, and I've got issues with Matthew Green. We won't get into it. We're not going to get into it. But he tweets out like scorched earth shit. Like, it's like, you have to read it yourself. I don't know if we could pull it up or not, but he was just slamming Merritt as like just internal politics are going to play over what really matters to the people of Hamilton. And it was just, this doesn't happen. Like, we can talk shit about each other in council and at convention and whatnot, but when you do it publicly, especially MPs or MPPs, like, there is usually huge blowback internally. Like, they kicked me right out for doing it. You know, I'm not Matthew Green, so he'll probably be fine, but this is a huge moment. Like, no one said shit about John Horgan, right, when they should have. Anyway, I have talked for a really long time on this, but I just so disappointed to see in this moment where we are at a writ drop, and it's like trying to stop the worst possible scenario of Doug Ford having another majority, and they drop the ball like this. Now, Joe has put up Sarah Jama's statement. It's kind of small. I don't know if folks can read it there, but she's going to run as an independent. She will run as an independent. So,
as she should.
Yeah. Comments? Questions?
So, definitely a little passionate here. And again, but nothing you said was wrong. And so the only thing I'd say is there was 2 others that did stand with her. I remember seeing them. And that was Joel Harden and I believe Kristen Wong. They also wore keffiyehs and were kicked out of legislature with Sarah Jama. All 3 of them were kicked out. Those are the only ones that will, I'll pay attention to. But it's I'm quite upset about the fact that, again, there was not more solidarity from the party that's supposed to be echoing the sound of solidarity. And yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we definitely need to talk about is they're dropping in somebody from Guelph. You're absolutely right. Why is there nobody local that they can put against Sarah Jam? Like,
I know why. I know why. Because they have fucking principles. They have principles.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's either principles or there's just nobody else that wants to go against Sarah. Because those who would be going for the NDP also like Sarah. They also support Sarah. So if you need to drop somebody in there and there's nobody else there, right now there's nothing about this that spins right for the NDP. And I'm like, because again, to this day, it still drives me nuts that you kicked her out of the party because she spoke out of place. And then within a week, you're saying the same message that she was saying. Like, what are you doing? If anything, this just makes you look petty. And now, not letting her back in after all this, as in like finding a way to resolve this makes you look really petty. Like,
and that's pretty much how Green's statement reads. Like, you guys are just trying to save face internally, and in the end it's blowing up so bad. So even in Davenport, which is the riding for Merritt Stiles, you've got local organizations putting out little campaigns saying Merritt Stiles is our MPP, but Davenport supports Sarah Jama. That's Davenport for Palestine there, but also the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. They have spent resources putting out a campaign going, what the fuck? This is the writ is dropped, people. The writ is dropped. I don't want to really be sitting here shitting on the Ontario NDP, even though it looks like I have so much fun doing it, and I do. But I know my place. Like, I know that there's a time and a place for it. It's not super effective to do it now, and I know what most people are thinking, like, oh, you're just like handing stuff over to Ford, but that's what they're doing. At some point we have to look at these institutions and going like, okay, there's like getting bad advice, and then there's like sabotaging your campaign. And I think like dropping Sarah and like losing Hamilton Center, not even just like the seat of Hamilton Center, but like the mentality of the people in Hamilton. Like, you were just throwing away one of the strongholds that the NDP had left. And that's why you can't find anybody. Even rumor has it, and I don't have the details, that Hamilton Mountain, I think there's like 3 or 4 ridings in Hamilton. Someone's going to correct me, but Hamilton Mountain has a candidate who won a nomination race, and they're trying to remove him. So it's just the same patterns. They have not learned a thing. It's a new provincial director, but they're just going through the same things. And the reason that they've given Sarah for denying it isn't because like, hey, you spoke out on Palestine, because like they don't want to be on record doing that again. But they're saying she can't run again because she said she would run as an independent should they reject her. So, and I've seen them penalize comrades before who have run as independents because they couldn't secure a candidacy, because you have to submit your whole life to them. You upload all of your social media to them, all of it, direct messages included, unless you push back. Like, I mean, they get access to everything. And most of the time they make you shut it all down.
Except in my case.
Did you get away with it? Like, some of us had, yeah.
My file was too big.
You just crash the computer and save everyone, right? Like, sure, here you go.
They said I was too prolific to run because they wouldn't have been able to vet me.
Oh, I see. Yes. Okay. I thought maybe, we're willing to overlook your social media. We don't have the resources for that. Just run. Because I'll tell you right now, they're fucking desperate. I got,
not that desperate if they're doing this shit.
No, but for candidates. Like, this is how people are going like, why didn't they have someone in Hamilton? Let me tell you what's happening like the last year. The people at head office and other folks willing to do the campaign search are begging people. Like, if you go drop into the DMs of your riding association who hasn't announced yet, I promise you they'll ask you to run. You go volunteer to handle their Twitter account and they will ask you to run. I'm watching it happen in the DMs because they've not removed me from a lot of the writing things, and I'm watching it happen. So it's like in a time where they have had 3 years, I know it's an early election, 3 years to just show themselves as a true opposition, as a solution to Ford and this nightmare that we're in. And I feel like they're going to let that completely slip away. So it's, hopefully the NDP federally is watching this and learning, but considering like they went through this many years and the feds have even done this over and over again, is just like, they're not learning.
It's what happened to me in the 2021 election. Nobody was coming forward for the NDP nomination in Lethbridge riding. And so I put my name forward, and still no one. I wasn't competing against anybody. It was going to be an acclamation. Nobody else had put their name forward. And then they came back and said I was too prolific on social media, meaning there's too much for them to go through, and that I was too, I can't remember what the word was, but I spoke my mind too much. And so as a result, they said I couldn't run. And they ended up doing a drop-in candidate again, someone in Lethbridge, but it was a relatively young person, which is fine if you want to, but it also meant that they weren't well known. It was a university student, so wouldn't have been able to dedicate very much time to it either if they did win, and nobody knew who the person was. So there were a lot of people who were upset that they didn't go with me. But I ended up still running. I stayed in the race and ran as independent, and there were almost 100 independent candidates running in the federal election, and I placed 7th in the number of votes. I placed 5th in my riding, but running as an independent is really tough in a federal election. But I managed to got the 7th highest number of votes out of the nearly 100 people who ran as independent. So I think if I had the party infrastructure behind me, I could have done pretty well.
For folks out there wondering how to run, you just need to go to Elections Canada and print off a form, and you fill it out, and you get 100 signatures from people in your riding, and you get on the ballot. You don't actually need any money. I mean, if you want to campaign, you're going to need some resources, but you don't have to have signs. Some people don't even like the signs. Like, you can still possibly get into the debates, or maybe your local newspaper is going to take quotes from people on their points on issues, so you can have the most socialist ideas out there, and get a platform with almost no resources.
That's what I did.
Yeah, like people.
I had a $0. I had a $0 campaign. I was spending no money, and I accepted no donations, and I still ran a campaign that got me over 1,000 votes. I was at all the debates, and I was at more debates than the person who won the election in our riding. So I was at all the debates. I got quoted in several media articles. I was able to get my 100 signatures by getting people to volunteer to help me collect them. So it was really easy for me to do, and didn't cost me a penny.
No, in the summer it's a little easier to do because you can like stand at a farmer's market or whatnot and just get 100 signatures. You don't have to know 100 people. You don't even have to go door to door. In the winter, it's a little tougher. And for folks that are like, oh, 100 people won't sign, just one of the tips that I had, because I'm in a very conservative riding, and I was running from the NDP, but trying to get those 100 signatures, they don't want an NDP candidate, right, for the most part. But I played the well, come on, it's part of democracy. Why don't you just let me in the fight? What harm would it do? You know what I mean? This is my democratic right? You believe in a healthy democracy. So don't you want to see me get trampled by the conservatives, right? Like, just let me in the party. Like, let me play. And people will they kind of would snicker, and they're like, yeah, whatever, I'll sign. And you could do it quite quickly. You can still get your name on a ballot. I'm not here to promote electoral politics by any means, but I understand the want for people to stand up in their communities and be heard. And sometimes during an election, that's really the only time. And when you're really disheartened by all of the talking points out there, sometimes the only way to get one out there is to do it yourself, right? But lots of local organizations are working these campaigns. Like right now in Ontario, folks like ABC, or Not One Seat. So that's anybody but conservatives. Not One Seat is just don't let conservatives get a seat. That's the idea. So they're not necessarily campaigning for the NDP. You can't bring yourself to campaign for the Ontario NDP, but you can go out and campaign against Ford, against ideas, right? You can haunt your MPP on the campaign trail like Mulrooney. You will see me. You will see me. I won't be in orange this time around, but you won't be able to hide. I contemplated trying to get on the ballot here just because I thought, well, I've been in the debates twice. The people holding them might invite me. They sometimes don't invite independents because, there's 100 of them or something silly in a by-election. But, if you're kind of well known in your community, or you maybe know somebody that's hosting the debates, or even in my riding, we actually got more of a grassroots group to hold the debates rather than the Chamber of Commerce or the business associations that normally put them on. And so, the questions were geared towards us for once, which is very refreshing.
One of the nice things about running as an independent too is you could have a broader appeal amongst people because you don't have to push party platforms or party speaking points. And I had lots of people who were who voted conservative in the 2019 election who said they were going to be voting for me.
Yeah, they're not confused, right, by the color system.
Yeah, exactly.
when you hear ideas, like when you go door to door with an idea and not a color, like let's say you're going with a local group, such better reception to ideas. Like I remember campaigning for the raising the minimum wage. And I know if I had gone to the farmer's market in an orange and with my button, it would have been like, I'm not talking to you. But when you just like had this idea of, hey, don't you think folks serving your coffee shouldn't be living in poverty? And they're like, yeah, no. And they'd be like, what do you mean the minimum wage is only $14? You know, of course I think they should get another dollar. Like it was so easy to sell people when they didn't have their backup of like, oh no, you're my opposition. So I'm going to take everything you say with a grain of salt to start with. Yeah. So yeah, you don't have to stump for the NDP because there's people out there, they feel really lost right now, right? Because we are in a tough political climate. They feel they know they need to be doing something and not on the sidelines. And then an election comes along and they're like, what do I do? And I feel that because a lot of what I says like dissuades you from doing that. But there are still avenues. There are still people trying to work the party from the inside. I feel for those people. But let's move on. Are we all happy? Do we all, like, I know I had a lot to say, but for folks, I have my own story of Candidacy being rejected, but I'm not going to take up space here. There's an episode, Why They Came For Me, and it's similar to Kim's, but it's not unique either. It's like I have heard it from a million people, so there's so many of us disgruntled NDPers out there.
Yeah, I have a few interviews on my podcast, same story as well.
We should just make one giant playlist, all the receipts you'll ever need to steer you clear. But it feels like this canon event folks seem to want to put themselves through regardless of my warnings, our warnings. But alas, we can't save everybody.
Maybe save me. I haven't gone into the elections or tried to be running an MP, and based on your stories alone, I don't think I want to.
Well, like not under a partisan flag. I wouldn't recommend that for anybody at all. It's very, like, I know you get the resources that Kim was talking about, but you also get the headaches and the confinement. Like you tried talking about the stuff you really want to talk about under a party flag, and you're going to get a call from the director right away. You don't have to answer the call. For any candidates running out there, just don't pick up the phone for head office for the next, 30 days. What are they going to do? Fuck them. Say what you want to say. If they can't turn you off now, if you're approved and on that ballot,
too late.
Scream from the rooftops about whatever you want to scream about. Free Palestine. But let's transition into Trump. I know it's like, man, but one of the things that he announced this week really kind of stirred us up again. I mean, last week we were talking about the deportations and folks mobilizing against the deportations and ICE. And we have seen a lot of that, which is heartening. Like, I mean, endless examples of teachers, Greyhound bus drivers, other organizations, city mayors, just mobilizing their communities against these federal agents who are trying to deport people and rip families apart. But Trump, I guess he's finding that not everybody's going to fit on a plane and go back somewhere. You know, I guess like some folks are not going to get back into their home countries. Perhaps, you know, I don't know what he plans on doing with it, but Trump is telling the armed forces he is greenlighting a 30,000 person capacity camp. He's building camps, people, again. I know Obama had a lot to do with, and the Democrats had a lot to do with the migrant detention centers that his last administration had to deal with, where, you know, we love to shit on Trump for jailing migrants, but Obama was also doing it. But now he's going to build an even bigger camp at Guantanamo Bay.
I got a video for that.
Yeah. Post it up there, Joe.
And just a reminder for listeners is that Guantanamo Bay is in another country. It's not in the United States.
It's part of Cuba.
Absolutely. There's a lot to unpack here, so we'll listen to him first. Unfortunately, I apologize, everybody. Brace yourself. Trigger warning. It's the man.
I am also signing an executive order to instruct the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security to begin preparing the 30,000 person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay. Most people don't even know about it. We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. Some of them are so bad we don't even trust the countries to hold them because we don't want them coming back, so we're going to send them out to Guantanamo. This will double our capacity immediately, right? And tough. That's a tough place to get out of. Today's signings bring us one step closer to eradicating the scourge of migrant crime in our communities once and for all.
That's enough of that. That made me so mad. Like,
Yeah.
threatening.
So
Threatening.
Beds. He makes it sound like a continuing care center.
Yeah, a warming facility. One of Toronto's warming centers.
I mean, one of the big things there was something that you pointed out, which was the way he kind of phrased it very much is like, we're making the center available, as in it's already there, or the plan, I think, is what Jessa was mentioning. Like the plan was already there. So
well, he says the center, not a center. Yeah. Like not this hypothetical center. He's like the center that most of you all don't know about.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
So who built it or who designed it? Biden's administration. Fuck. Yeah. No.
Well, he says it's going to be doubling capacity, but I don't think Guantanamo is that large to have, like, to be capable of holding 15,000. I could be wrong.
Well, they have a substantial amount of land there in Cuba, on the tip of Cuba. I don't know if we can.
They have this, but the land itself is not going to be sufficient in regards to, you're going to need some sort of structures, buildings, cells, whatever. I don't know if they currently have that, or if they're going to be making, like, are they going to be constructing these things? Like, this is going to take a while. This takes time.
Yeah, it's like 45 square miles, 116 square kilometers. And like, he doesn't need to house these people comfortably, Joe. Have you seen the warming centers? Like the way they cram beds in there, inches apart from one another? Like, if folks remember the images of Gitmo that we saw before, a lot of the cages were outdoor and it was really just fencing. It was outdoor fencing split into cells. It kind of looked like the G20 cells that they put in Toronto for a while. Did you see that? Toronto. I pronounced all the T's again. I have been living outside the city for too long. Anyway, the naval base there. So what a kerfuffle. And what a fuck you to the Cubans too, because Trump's also, so Biden right before on his way out, he took Cuba off of the state sponsors of terrorism list. And in his statement, he even admitted there was never even a reason to have them on the list, right? There's just no evidence they should be on the list. We're taking them off. And of course, Trump, he threw them right back on the list at the same time, telling them that we're going to build an even larger facility on your land. And it was like, yeah, it's just all of the markings of fascism and a resurgence of a Hitler-esque type character are there on the wall for everyone to see, yet there are still so many people that seem blissfully unaware or willing to just, like, they're groaning about it, but they just don't know what to do about it, or perhaps they're just too overwhelmed by all of the things he's doing that they don't know where to start the pushback. But, yeah, that's a troubling development indeed. It's the way he criminalizes migrants continually, though, so it's like he's implying they're all criminals and these are the worst of. And they're so bad that we don't even trust these other countries to keep them there. And yeah, this is going to play out on the streets for everybody in the xenophobia that happens. People are becoming emboldened, but thankfully facing consequences. Like, not everyone's able to throw their heart out to folks and not face vitriol or firings. So, we'll see. But Kim, I mean, we like to talk about Americans and how cruel they are and how many prisons they have and how, like, the private prison industrial system is inhumane. I mean, we even did a little short story on incarcerated folks fighting fires in California. But you're uncovering for the Alberta worker there some things about Canadian prisons that should have us taking a second look as well, yeah?
Yeah, so Correctional Services Canada will publish a media release, just a brief media release, every time a death occurs in one of their prisons. And a few years ago, I decided to go through and compile all the deaths that occurred in that year. I think it was 2022, either 2022 or 2023. And then I did it. No, yeah, it was 2022. And then I did it in 2023. And then again, I just did one for 2024 yesterday. And I found that 68 people died in Canadian prisons in 2024. And that is pretty similar to the 2023 deaths. There were 69 in 2023, but there were only 54 in 2022. But then there were 63 in 2021. So we're around or above 60 mark every year. So it's not like it's trending upwards. I only have 4 years of data. But one of the things that's interesting is of those 68 who died last year, 22 died of what correctional services called apparent natural causes. One died after being assaulted, but the remaining 45 deaths didn't have a cause listed, and they never follow up. Yeah, they never follow up in another media release to say what the causes were.
Is this like a privacy thing? Like the families they need to approve, or is this like COVID and they're just pretending it doesn't exist?
No, because in 2021, there were several releases that were classified as COVID-19 deaths. So it doesn't seem like these would necessarily be COVID-19 related.
I have guesses.
Go ahead.
Because you said natural causes. I haven't heard anything about, well, and there was one for assault.
Well, they died following an assault.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Yeah, it was yes, that generally would occur. So one of the statistics I'd be kind of curious, because I'd be surprised if it's zero, would be drug usage or any other influence, any other substance abuse of some kind. We know it does get into this system, whether it be penitentiary or even the detention level. It gets in there, or even something as simple as complications from withdrawal, and that could also be fatal to some cases.
I've never seen in the 3 years of covering this once any of those media releases mention something that's drug related,
like a drug
or
poisoning,
substance related. Yeah, drugs poisoning or withdrawal or whatever. I've never seen even one of those media releases mention anything about substances.
We also know a lot of them are over capacity, right? A lot of our facilities are more crowded than they need to be. And I'm speculating perhaps their access to healthcare isn't what it should be, especially in the face of. I also imagine that drug poisonings wouldn't want to be advertised as the reason or cause of death. That is a black stain on the correctional services, right? Who are telling Canadians that they've locked these people away, locked down good, they're not getting access to anything. And meanwhile, they're getting access to drugs, which is common. But
at the bottom of every media release, there's a statement that says, as in all cases involving the death of an inmate, Correctional Services Canada will review the circumstances. But the results of those reviews are never published. And I even asked for, I don't know. I even followed up with them the first year I did this, and I never received the summary of any of the reviews. It's not anything that they were willing to give to me. So I imagine if you did a FOIP, you could get it, but I don't have the capacity to do that. So
I mean, that would be something, because you're doing this with the federal level penitentiaries. A FOIP would be really, really interesting to find out, because again, I think it's important for us to find out what's going on in there, because I think there's additional questions. Again, I've got some anecdotal stories in regards to just the detention level centers, in regards to what I've heard of. Was it last year in April when my friend ended up being incarcerated? She let me know that there were 6 individuals that passed away on the male side, while incarcerated in the Ottawa Detention Center, it's not an uncommon thing, as they were saying. There's, in regards to different things. So knowing that this is still happening at the federal level, and probably seeing all this stuff at the provincial level, because the detention centers are run provincially and the federal one is the penitentiaries. There is stories that are kind of hidden that I think we definitely need to see. And I mean, I think a FOIP is worth it, would it not?
Yeah, I would think so. There's a couple other interesting things I noticed as well. Is in all the media releases since I started doing this, they would list the crimes that the inmates had been charged with when they were sentenced. Starting in October, they stopped listing the crimes in their media releases for some reason.
Really?
Yeah, it's October, November, and December media releases. None of them had crimes listed, no charges listed.
Your mind starts racing in the vacuum of information, right? Like,
Yeah.
why, what is the answer? Why aren't they giving us this information? And then, like, what does it mean at a large, right? Like, my guess is they came across a few folks that had really petty charges and they didn't want to announce, like the story that you tell there. Well, not petty, but folks who are just in there 29 days.
Yeah.
And
Tyrone
they
Hunter.
Tyrone Hunter had no explained cause of death. And I guess it's just like you get to this point where you're having to explain to people that folks who've made mistakes are thrown into the system that's not taking care of them whatsoever.
Yeah.
Why do you keep these numbers? Like, I know you're not keeping them, but you go through the trouble of compiling them. Why?
I just think that prisoners are abandoned in society. It's something that people want to forget about, or they're people want to forget about. People assume that if somebody is in prison, they deserve to be there, and they deserve, as far as they're concerned, they deserve to be there for the rest of their lives, no matter what their crime was. It's just, it feels like it's something I could do to show an act of solidarity for people, because a lot of these people are still part of the working class, right? And so regardless of what they did. And part of the problem too is a lot of the narrative that we see in mainstream media revolves around snapshots in time, that they don't provide a lot of context to the people who end up in prison. They just report on the crime that was committed, and then the prison sentence, and maybe information from the trial, but they never talk about the journey the person took in their lives to get to that point that they felt like they had to. There were some individuals who died who had pretty horrific stories as far as the crimes they committed. So, I mean, it'd be difficult to really, I mean, it was pretty horrific, some of the things they did, but others were just like, I don't know, things could have been different for these people. And there were a few stories I came across, and there was one person who got into a fight with somebody at work, and who had thrown a can of produce at them, barely missed their head. And the person who was attacked with that can of food had been involved with martial arts of some kind. I can't remember what it was, and struck him once back in defense and killed him unintentionally, and then he ended up going to prison as a result of it. So, like, something like that just doesn't seem like it's something that you should be in prison for the rest of your lives, literally for the rest of his life. So there were just stories like that. It just seems to me like the stories of these people are a lot more complex, especially for the majority of them. And but society as a whole seems to forget them. And then, of course, we abandon them if they ever do get out. And there's a reason why there's recidivism rates are so high, especially for people of color, Indigenous people. It's just, our whole system is completely messed up as far as imprisoning people goes.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm grateful that you do it. I just wanted to give you space to explain to folks why it's important. There's a lot of abolitionist groups, local ones. Wherever you have a prison in Canada, you will likely have some local abolitionist groups. I know one common activity that would be easy for people to participate in is a letter writing campaign. That is one way you can let folks on the inside know that they've not been forgotten about. either way, just kind of Instagram is a good spot to start looking for those groups, anti-prison groups, or at least prison support groups for folks on the inside. Not everyone can do what Kim does, collecting the information, but you can do something with that information. We are at my favorite part. Did we miss a headline just before? No. I mean, there's lots of things that go on. We can only talk about the things, I guess, that have us most riled up. And sometimes we like to choose the stories that people aren't talking about enough. And I think for this week, we've done that. But again, my favorite part of the show isn't so much venting about what's going on, but talking about the victories of people trying to disrupt these kinds of things. Not just disrupt actions or events. We give examples of that, but really trying to upend the system. And so Disruptive Updates. And for folks who haven't heard the Blueprints of Disruption podcast, you can get it anywhere, including here on YouTube, but it's like a catalog now of about 170 episodes of interviews with activists and organizers and journalists and authors, people that are out there every day doing the work to, decolonize, to tear down capitalism, to empower their communities to whatever end, and I think celebrating those stories is important for us because we can't just look at what's wrong. There's an avenue for everyone to kind of get in and do something about it. It also makes you feel better about the situation when you're at least in the fight. So I don't normally cast my net this wide, but I did get a story out of New Zealand I thought I would share with folks. Activists in New Zealand have been successful in pressuring their government to change the visa requirements for Israelis coming into the country. They are now given a questionnaire that asks them if they have served in the IDF or the IOF, and then it asks for the details of that service. It wants to know the dates. It asks them explicitly if they've been involved in war crimes. And this visa process has actually been used to deny people entry to the country. This is not all that it's sort of unique. Australia does something similar, and we're hoping other countries will follow suit. This is the direct result of organizations who are trying to find individual IDF soldiers who have then, come home or are traveling even for holiday and make their lives as difficult as possible. So we told the story about in Brazil, activists found a former reservist there that was reportedly involved in the demolition of civilian buildings. They were able to kind of prove this. So the Brazilian government wanted to investigate them. Well, he had to fly out of there. And this also happened in Sri Lanka. Last month, Israel had to evacuate one of their soldiers because he was about to be brought up on investigation for war crimes in the Gaza Strip. Sweden has a couple cases pending where they're trying to prosecute folks or at least kick them out of the country. So we've talked about here also, the Maple did a great job. I don't know if I have the article here, but they did a good job of talking about how many Canadians, we don't know exactly how many, but anybody who had put it out there, they compiled a list, and you can actually go to the Maple and scroll through and meet all of these Israeli soldiers that are now on Canadian soil, so to speak. And, there's just a large movement there to make sure that they're held accountable, even, if the second they leave Israel, because we feel like there's not a lot we can do on our home soil here in Canada. But on top of the arms embargo we talk a lot about, there are many things you can do. One thing I thought it was neat, I don't know how many of them are vacationing here, but I guess in New Zealand is a popular tourist destination for Israelis, particularly their soldiers. So there's one group there, and they actually have a hotline, a genocide hotline, to track down Israeli soldiers that are holidaying in the country. And way to go, people. The Human Rights Commissioner of the country was like, can you please take that down? We feel like it maybe violates their rights. And they're like, nope. Nope, the gloves are off, people. You want to come here on our beaches, we will haunt you for it. So like, it's endless, the amount of ways that folks can interject. I think in the episode I dropped on Tuesday, it's an interview with Fatima Saleh of Edmonton and Anna Littman from Labor for Palestine. But Fatima tells like a story of out in Edmonton, there are changing the water meters. EPCOR is changing the water meters for folks in Edmonton to made in Israel meters. And there's a whole campaign around there to block that, to allow people to opt out of it, but, you know, mostly to pressure folks into EPCOR into not partnering with these Israeli companies. So, like, it's not just weapons. The water meters, for heaven's sake, are, you know, not off limits to people trying to, you know, just dollar by dollar drain the coffers of the Zionist state. Like, there is no target too small. So that, if folks want to know more about that, especially if you're watching out in Alberta, that's EPCOR Delivers Genocide. Yeah, just type that into your Google. I think it's .org. But they do have a website up, and it has like multiple things. Like, you can send in a letter, you can send in an email. Here's the steps to refuse the meter in your house. Here's how to delay the installation of the meter in your house. Like, just like all of these things to make the life difficult for EPCOR until they do what they're being asked to do. So I thought.
And if you want to know more about Fatima, I interviewed her on the first season of the Alberta Worker podcast.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, no, we've had Fatima on a few times now too. It's just a fearless individual, but yeah, I thought that was a great example of a local initiative where someone is continually doing digging as to like what Israeli companies are here, or what are they trying to sell us, and how can we stop that? Even here at Blueprints of Disruption, we used to use Riverside FM, and I don't know if anybody out there is a podcaster and they're still using that software. That's an Israeli company, so you know there's alternatives out there. You don't need to be using them.
When I was doing the show with Tina back last year, we were using a software called EV Mux, and everything was fine until we were listening to the owners like, yes, we're proudly supporting Israel. Yes, I'm shopping.
Yeah, they get you with those annual subscriptions, though. It took us a while to get out of it. But yeah. But bit by bit, like it's overwhelming sometimes thinking like you've got to stop a genocide, but like you can do like little tiny parts here and there, and they really are easy as pie. I want to also flag people. I do have the link. See, I am sometimes organized. Anna, with Anna's blog.
No, I don't have that.
Okay, I'm going to drop that in the comments now. Anna Littman, she's been a guest. We have an entire playlist now dedicated to Anna. She has traveled to the West Bank many times since October 7th, 2023. She's also part of Independent Jewish Voices and Labor for Palestine, and she has gone back to the West Bank. She is working to help resist against the settler violence that is happening there, and she has started a blog. So if folks want to subscribe to her blog there, she just dropped one, I think, yesterday. She didn't tell me she's going back, and I even teased her. I edited it out of the episode. I go, Anna, how do you keep flying? Like, how are you not on a no-fly list? Like, I see you going in and out of the United States, and you're like, somehow end up in the West Bank. She's Jewish, so she's able to enter through Israel, but she teased people. She's like, tell everyone, but don't tell Mossad. You know, it was public. I'm not outing her here. I mean, there's an entire blog, but you can, you know, there's a range. So you can see you can refuse a water meter made in Israel, or maybe don't buy Israeli dates. Or you can travel to the fucking West Bank and document the settler violence. It's a real range of resistance. I maybe won't suggest that for everyone, but please be sure to support her Substack if you can. You can read it for free, but if anyone can pay for a subscription, I encourage you to do so. Anna has just been on the front lines of this. I mean, well before October 7th, but it's just been full throttle for her and for a lot of people. But yeah, shout out to Anna if you're listening. We love you. I'm going to stay on Palestine just for a second. I only caught the very end of it last night, but the Palestinian Solidarity Canada group, which is like an umbrella group of like, I don't know how many now, many local organizations. Like here in Toronto, it's like almost every riding association and the GTA has a local Palestinian solidarity group. And then all these groups, or a lot of them, operate under a larger umbrella just to make sure everybody's working on the same page and like pointed in a similar direction and whatnot. And one of the main questions around like the federal election is like, what do we do? Nobody has a really good record. We don't know where to put the pressure. And so that was what last night was about. So, you know, the messaging that will come out of that is still to be determined. We will see it start to trickle out. But folks in the Palestinian solidarity movement are mobilizing around this election. And it's not too late to get involved with your local group because they're stepping up. And like one of the messages from our episode this week, you know, the title is Ceasefire. Now what? Right? We asked for a ceasefire. We got a 42-day ceasefire. What does that mean? And we answer that, and I think it becomes clear even from like the first soundbite I throw in there from Fatima is like there is no end point. The end point is total liberation. So foot to the pedal, people. We celebrated the ceasefire for the smallest moment, and now it's back to work, especially for allies. We just can't stop. So I wanted to just update folks on that who maybe are thinking the federal election might play into this. It will. We just don't know how yet. Also, folks in UBC, that's out in British Columbia, University of British Columbia, they have been very active in the Palestinian solidarity movement. And one of the things that they're working on right now is getting IOF soldiers off their campus. And I was like, what? Because I had problems with this at York, or they still do, where they invite soldiers there to give talks and basically recruit. That's not what's happening here. It's the Invictus Games. If folks know the Invictus Games, I think like Prince Harry is one of the patrons of it. His face is obviously often attached to it. It's like the Olympics for wounded veterans and like from around the world. And they have invited Israeli soldiers to participate, which means, you know, from like February 7th through 14th, they're going to be hosting IDF soldiers on campus. So that's obviously not acceptable. So folks in BC can give the UBC campus a hand. They have many solidarity groups on campus. So there's like UBC Pally Profs, you just need to use your Instagram to find these folks. But yeah, I mean, this is happening on every university campus, especially ones that had an encampment. The encampments might be gone, but the work isn't. It hasn't stopped. So that's just one example from this week. Yeah. So one of the, I don't normally fix my hair while I'm on live, but one of the episodes that's in the can that I'm really excited about. Actually, there's 2 episodes of Blueprints of Disruption that are coming up that are kind of related, and they're for the ACAB crowd. Toronto police have been doing activists really dirty, and thankfully people are watching them. And there are movement lawyers trying to counter all of their work. So next week's episode is with a member of the Orange Hats. They issued a press release this week. I was so glad to see them finally form and be able to talk and share. And the day after they gave themselves the green light to share what they've been observing, I called them into the studio, and they were gracious enough to hop in right away and talk about what they do. The Orange Hats are legal observers. They are based in Toronto, but they are branching out. They are trying to train as many people across Canada as possible. But their focus is to watch police activity, the trends around them, and to help the movements navigate that. And what that means, you'll have to listen to the episode to hear it, but they have officially launched. So they actually do wear orange hats that mark them as legal observers. And the guest remains anonymous, but they do provide a litany of tips for people in the streets facing police, as well as just like organizers on how to navigate the different restrictions cops are trying to put on people, the harassment, the surveillance. Not a lot of it will surprise you, but it's really constructive the way he speaks about it and talks how we're responding to it as a movement, right? So it doesn't slow us down. But yeah, so kudos to the Orange Hats. They do have a website. It's, I think Joe just showed their statement there, but it's orangehats.ca.
I'll send out the URL.
Thank you. .noblogs.org. And really good folks there. They used to be part of the larger legal community there, but it's they've gone separately to free themselves in order to speak more on what we need to hear. So stay tuned for that episode. And then the week after that is 2 movement lawyers come on and talk about how the prosecutors and how the political interference works on activists after they're charged, and what we can be doing about that. So yeah, get ready to get mad, but it's also very useful information. So yeah, I got one more disruptive update. I think it's my. Do you folks have any updates that you want to add before I go to my last one, which just came in yesterday afternoon?
Sure, I got one.
Yeah.
I just want to give a shout out to about 1,000 education support workers in Alberta, in Edmonton, several surrounding towns, and Fort McMurray, who are currently on strike and have been striking off and on since about September. But some of them went into full strike mode in November, and then some of them went into full strike mode in earlier this month, in January, I should say, depending on when this episode gets published. But these are education support workers, so they include educational assistants, library workers, food workers, custodial workers, tradespeople like electricians, carpenters who support school systems, that sort of thing. So anybody basically who aren't teachers or administrative or like receptionists, that sort of thing. And they really make schools run. Without them, the schools wouldn't be able to run. And many of them haven't received a raise in over a decade. Some of them are making under $30,000 a year. Some of them have to hold down 3 jobs in order to live. And they are tired of it. And they have tried to get the school boards to finally give them the recognition and the incomes and benefits that they deserve. But the school boards continue to say their hands are tied because of the government. The government is mandating what they are allowed to negotiate. So they're not even really negotiating with the employer. They're negotiating indirectly with the province, which I think is bad faith bargaining. And so they gave them so many chances, and they finally said, you know what, enough is enough. And so now they're trying to shut down the system. And school boards are trying to come back by hiring substitute teachers to do their work, or doing the work themselves, or convincing teachers to take on some of the work themselves. And I would like to see a lot more solidarity on the parts of other people from the working class. It's like, you know what, I'm a teacher, I'm going to teach, I'm not going to be doing photocopies. You can do the photocopies for me if you want, but I'm not doing the work that these people are supposed to be doing, because that would be crossing the picket line, and I'm morally opposed to that. So anyhow, I just wanted to shout out those workers. Again, about 1,000 education support workers.
No. You find that out. But Ontario had a similar strike with the support workers, educational support workers, and it was the same problem with crossing the picket line. The teachers unions, there's like 3 or 4 different teachers unions that operate out of those schools, right? High school, Catholic, blah, blah, blah. It's a little complicated. And not one of them really kind of took a stand that, either they wouldn't physically cross the picket line, which they were physically crossing the picket line, but then they were also picking up the tasks of folks acting as scabs. So coast to coast, that cross-union solidarity, cross-labor solidarity is really lacking. That's a whole episode in itself, right? Like their hands can be tied sometimes. There's lots of reasons perhaps why they don't go out on a limb, but we sure as hell would love to see it. It might spark something, people.
Well, on that note, there is a group of unions in Alberta who've starting to organize on cross-union solidarity. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the long run.
Well, I'm sure you'll keep us updated, right, through the Alberta Worker.
They have a meeting, I think next week or the week after, here in Lethbridge that I'll be attending. So it'll be interesting to see what they have to say.
Well, we'll keep our eyes peeled. Like the Ontario Federation of Labor, maybe they could be watching. Laura, if you're listening. But I'm on to the update I'm excited about too, because we've had these people on like twice and we have an entire playlist. I will get better with links, people. But if you go to our link tree, there is a playlist of tenant power, because I truly believe that organizing tenants are one of those like secret weapons. Not quite secret, because the landlords are starting to figure it out. They know, but I mean, like 30% of us, 30% of us are renters. If we all were unionized and connected, could you imagine? Could you imagine the power that exists there? And tenants are organizing and winning. Like this playlist is full of not just examples of buildings organizing like floor by floor, block by block, street by street, but it gives you like the how to, like especially Bruno. Bruno is one of the, well, he wouldn't like me saying this, but founders of the York Southwestern Tenants Union. And he came on for a blueprints of a rent strike, and he really did walk through how to unionize your building. I don't know if he intended to, but when you hear it back, that's what it is. That's why I called it blueprints of a rent strike. It was how to get from that first kernel of meeting your neighbor, commiserating, radicalizing, and ending up on a rent strike. It's not immediate, but they do get there quite quickly. And they have plenty of buildings on rent strike. These people are not paying rent until their landlord either fixes up the place as they were instructed. There's a bunch of grievances out there. Above market rent increases that are essentially evictions and other issues. But one victory that we're here to share with you today came yesterday at the Landlord Tenant Board, where these folks have secured two major victories now. Like, this is an institution that sides with landlords all the time. But these folks know how to mobilize. They really know how to do what they're doing. And they were successful yet again at the LTB. So this gives real hope to folks who are fighting back against landlords, where we have previously felt completely inadequate. Like, most folks just even get a whiff of an eviction. Like, your landlord's like, I want you out. They go. Right? They don't even know they have a notice that needs to be delivered to them, and that they are due a hearing, like that there is recourse. So we've come a long way, baby. And yesterday, the York Southwestern tenants put out a call through their supporters to log on to the virtual portal for the Landlord Tenant Board. What this does, and this is a tactic being employed by a lot of organizations, not just with the LTB, but other court systems that allow observers. What it does is not only do you get to see the victory firsthand, but it puts pressure on the judges. The judges know there is a crowd watching them, a crowd familiar with the case, right? It's not actually a judge, but anyway, it's a tactic that seems to be paying off, but that's kind of minimizing the work that they do, because it wasn't just everyone showing up. Like, they put together the receipts. They are able to argue together in court. They're working as a unit, right? With one set of representation that's focused on not just getting one tenant what they need, or a couple tenants what they need, but the collective what they need. And yesterday they secured a victory for 80 tenants of Guestville who were fighting a rent eviction by a piece of shit named Michael Klein. Michael Klein is a notorious landlord in Toronto who has delivered hundreds upon hundreds of rent eviction notices to tenants. For folks who have not been paying attention, just really quickly, a rent eviction is when a landlord says that they're going to fix up the place, and they have to do such a big job that you actually can't live there while they do it. And they're able to raise the rents to the point where it serves as an eviction. The person there can't afford to come back. They're priced out of it. Often they're priced out of the whole community at once, right? It's often done in blocks. It's part of gentrification. Some municipalities, thanks to the work of like Acorn and other tenant groups, are bringing in rent eviction laws that will provide a little bit of protection as long as there's enforcement, which there's no budgeting for the enforcement part of it. But either way, these folks are securing victories against rent evictions right at the Landlord Tenant Board, right? Without the help of municipalities. And they won. right? So that's like a stay of execution for folks in this housing market, right? You can't just get priced out of your building. You're gone from your community. The chances of you finding a unit at that price now is rare, right? And if you do, it's not going to be next door. So these folks, they won, and the tweet from them, from Chiara Padavani, who again is one of the founders there, she tweets, "God, this feels good. We still have 24 other renovictions to beat in Mount Dennis alone, but there's no stopping us now." So, like I said, that's their second win against landlords, 2 different landlords. And so like they are really feeling it. And I hope all the other tenant unions, like Vancouver is really mobilizing. Ottawa is doing a great job of forming not just tenant unions, but then tenant union coalitions. Doesn't that give you the tingles, people? You don't just unionize your workplace. You can unionize your community. That's really what it is, because they're not all of them are like buildings. A lot of renters are in the basement or rooms within homes. And so they're doing this street by street as well. Just like as a community, all the tenants invite them to a meeting. Everybody talks about what bothers them, gripes about their landlords. You find a commonality. You find that commonality, then you decide, well, what are we willing to do about it? And then that actually escalates. Like, well, we're going to write him a letter. We're going to visit his home. York Southwestern tenants, they were marching up and down this guy's neighborhood, kind of like Anthony Blinken style, just like making it uninhabitable for you to come home. Like, tell your neighbors how big of a piece of shit you are. Bank block tenants out in Ottawa, they use similar tactics to shame not just the landlords, but the investors. Like, if you're going to invest in these renovictions, we will make sure that the community knows you are a detriment to us. And your name and your picture will be everywhere. So the range of tactics tenants are using to secure these victories is huge. But when they happen at the landlord-tenant board, that's a surprise. So that is a tangible victory, not just like one we can perceive as a victory. But so, yeah. Anybody have any examples of tenant organizing in their neighborhood? Like, some people are surprised. I talk to people, they're like, yeah, my building unionized a year ago. I'm like, what? How is that not bigger news?
The information I got in regards to my city was actually from stuff you covered recently. So, in regards to Ottawa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've got over there the Neighborhood Organizing Committee, NOC, Ottawa NOC. So if you don't have a union in your building, go to the Ottawa Neighborhood Organizing Center, and they will start. They will cut you off on the right track. Or you can help another building with their organizing until yours is at the capacity where you can do your own building. So yeah, folks can step right into that kind of organizing locally. It's everywhere. Any more updates before I go into our last little bit, which is tips for activists? Well, for everybody. No. This one was neat. It's a whole zine that was put on Instagram. I'm not going to share the whole thing, but it was speaking to folks who are seeing this oligarchy, especially in the United States, shape up, or they just see this like horrible political climate, and they don't know where to start. And I thought this little slides that they put together really encompassed what we try to say at Blueprints of Disruption, is like there's a role for everybody. And I mean everybody. So it can be overwhelming thinking you've got to stop Trump, Elon, Pierre Poilievre, and Carney, and that's way too overwhelming. So one of their bits of advice there is, learn what you know or what you can, and then focus on what you can do. Like, where are your strengths? Where does your capacity leave you? And there's always a place to step in. And a lot of the roles that they describe, I think folks would be familiar with, like the marcher, right? Can you add critical mass to these big direct actions? A distributor. Can you hand out material? Can you hand out information? That can be done in multiple ways, like physical flyers or on social media, right? Are you disseminating information that doesn't necessarily you need to to gather the information. Someone else can be doing that work because another role is the educator, right? Like that is a role in itself. You don't have to do all of these roles either. Sometimes it feels like we should do a bit of everything, but maybe focus on what you're good at or what brings you joy as well, and do that, because there's niches. Volunteer, even in your community, like at a soup kitchen, at a shelter, at any one of these places that need volunteers, like just to get out in your community and build up the capacity for supports, because we're going to need them. But one of the ones I thought was interesting that is the kind of tip of the week is that of the quiet subversive. This is not me, okay? I cannot fill this role. It's too late for me. But I know that there are some people out there that are in positions, perhaps jobs, family, just circumstances where perhaps you can't be as loud as you'd like to be. Maybe you can't be loud at all. Like you just don't feel safe talking about abolishing the police or even speaking up politically at all. Like, I cannot imagine the different circumstances that exist for people. There's consequences, right, to speaking up. We've spoken about them. But one of the ones that I don't think about enough, I guess because it's too late for me, is the targeting that happens now, especially when you do speak up. The flag that you get. I mean, it could be like a literal tag on some of the algorithms, for heaven's sake. You know what I mean? Like you are then suppressed, or you're highlighted to the folks you don't want to be watching you. And so a quiet subversive is the person who lays low, but is then able to do things that I wouldn't be able to do. And I'm just going to kind of lean on the way that they've worded it here. If your calling is hiding people, for example, maybe you're not the person to go on social media and say, I would hide Anne in my attic. Because the second you say, I'm the kind of person that would hide Anne in my attic, is the second you're probably not useful for that task at all anymore. And so you may feel unsafe speaking out politically, but that is just one role. That's the distributor or the educator's role. You can march and remain anonymous. You can do other roles within the movement and still remain that quiet subversive. And that doesn't mean you've given up the fight. Now, not everyone can play this role or we wouldn't have a voice, but some can, and then some will be very useful. Picture the Underground Railroad. You couldn't be the same person handing out flyers against slavery and be the person hiding slaves. Does that make sense? So I know, that's not permission to not ever talk about it if you can talk about it, if you could just find courage to do it. But it's just that value that the range of roles that are out there in all movements is wider than I think most people think. I think they think that an activist is somebody who is going to shout as loud as possible and break windows or, meet with politicians and have to speak eloquently or all of these things. And it's really just absolutely a role for everybody. Keyboard warriors included. But I just saw Kelly, I'll highlight this comment here. Quiet subversives can give resources to others too. And that is actually one of the last roles in the slide is, what do they call them? The fundraiser, the financial supporter. You may not want to take money from billionaires, but there is funds to be had. And so if all you can do, like let's say you've got this cush job that would be at risk if you spoke out politically, surely you could help fund those or keep those out of jail who are doing the loudness. So thank you, Kelly, for that comment. But yeah, so I guess the whole purpose of the show here is to kind of get you fired up and angry about some of the things that are happening. But we end this way so that you know that there is power in your hands, right? That there are ways that you can disrupt these systems. And it's not a hopeless situation whatsoever. So thank you so much to to Joe for being such an excellent teammate.
That's what I do.
And it is what you do. I appreciate you so very much, especially like in this moment now, but just in general, Joe. Thank you. And for Kim, for coming on. This is my first time getting Kim in the studio, and you're just a wealth of knowledge. I wish I had more headlines that came from the Alberta worker there, because you've got the goods on them. You don't even need notes. You've done all the research. So I'm going to bug you to come back, friend.
I'm happy to come back. It's been my pleasure. I've loved being here, and I'm more than willing to come back anytime and as often as you want me to.
Write that down, Joe. He said it. I've got it on tape.
Clipping it, recording it. Done.
Yeah. So happy Friday, everybody. Make sure you tune in next time. We're always on at noon Eastern here on YouTube and on Facebook Live. And like, you can catch Blueprints of Disruption. We drop a new episode every Tuesday morning. And again, that is, the blueprints for disruption. So they can be very handy in these days. Again, thank you very much, and keep on disrupting.